What if the reason she stopped chasing you is the exact strategy you used to make her chase you in the first place? Most guys hear the logic, wait longer to reply, don't double text, act a little busy, and it sounds mature, even confident. You're not wrong that distance creates curiosity. But there's a difference between real distance and performed distance, and almost nobody explains it clearly. Because if you're quietly tracking her reaction while you wait, you haven't created distance at all. You've hidden the chasing somewhere she can't see yet, and she can still feel it completely. Here's the scene almost every guy recognizes. She texts him. He looks at it, feels the pull to answer right away, and stops himself. He waits, not because he's busy, because he read somewhere that waiting works. For the next 2 hours, he checks the clock more than he checks anything else. He rereads her message twice, drafts a reply, deletes it, writes something shorter, deletes that too. When he finally sends it, the timing looks effortless. Nothing about how he got there was effortless. That instinct makes sense. He's seen what happens when he replies too fast, agrees too easily, shows up whenever she's free. Interest starts feeling optional to her because it's guaranteed. So the logic isn't wrong. Attention that costs nothing gets treated like it costs nothing. The mistake is in what he built to fix it. He didn't remove the neediness, he just gave it a slower rhythm. Notice what actually changed and what didn't. Before, he needed her to respond quickly. Now, he's added a second job on top of the first one, managing how his own reply looks while he's calculating it. That's more to track, not less, which is exactly why the strategy gets harder to sustain the longer it runs. A man who genuinely doesn't need a fast reply doesn't have to think about his reply schedule at all. This is the hidden condition nobody names. Distance only works when it's a side effect of a full life, not when it's the main event of your day. The version most guys build is timed, monitored, and secretly anxious. He's not living differently. He's performing living differently, with one eye on his phone the entire time. And here's the part that reverses everything he thinks he's doing. Performing detachment requires more attention to her, not less. You cannot fake distance without obsessively tracking the exact thing you're pretending not to care about. She may not be able to explain what she's picking up on, but she's picking up on something. Energy that's engineered reads differently than energy that's simply occupied. A reply that took 4 hours because he was living his life feels different from a reply that took 4 hours because he made himself wait. The words can be identical. The undertone rarely is. There's a small, specific tell that shows up almost every time. And it's rarely discussed because it looks so minor. The timing of the reply is consistent, but the content of the reply gets thinner. A man who's actually busy replies late and briefly because he genuinely has less time and attention to give. A man who's performing busy replies late but puts unusual effort into the message itself. A better joke than usual, a slightly longer thought, something crafted to make sure the wait pays off. That effort to delay mismatch is one of the clearest signals of manufactured distance, and most guys have no idea they're doing it. Here's what actually happens next, and it's the part almost nobody talks about. The tactic works for a while, not because it's healthy, but because early uncertainty is genuinely interesting to sit with. She leans in. He notices her leaning in. And this is where most guys ruin it completely. The second she shows real interest, the anxiety that built the whole strategy doesn't disappear. It transfers. Now, instead of managing his replies, He's managing the relationship, replying instantly, over-explaining, checking in more, trying to lock down what he just spent weeks pretending not to need. The performance collapses the moment it succeeds, because the thing underneath it was never confidence. It was control. This is the loop almost nobody sees from the inside. He learns that timing produces results, so he keeps timing everything. She learns that his warmth arrives on a schedule, which starts to feel less like genuine interest and more like a decision he's making about her. Neither of them consciously decides this. It just becomes the shape of how they interact. His calculated distance training her to expect distance. Her uncertainty training him to keep calculating. Every cycle makes the next one feel more necessary and less natural. Here's where it gets more complicated, and where a lot of guys misread what happens next entirely. At some point, she may start to pull back too, replying slower herself, seeming less available, harder to read. The instinct is to interpret this as her losing interest, which triggers exactly the panic the whole strategy was supposed to prevent. But cooling is not always disinterest. Sometimes it's her adapting to a dynamic that's already started to feel unstable, mirroring the uncertainty she's been handed rather than manufacturing her own. What looks like her walking away can actually be her responding in kind to a rhythm he built first. He wrote the tempo. She's just playing it back to him. And normalization creeps in exactly the way it always does. The first delayed reply felt strategic. By the 10th, it's just how he operates. Not a choice anymore, a personality. Somewhere in there, he stops noticing he's doing it. He starts describing himself as someone who doesn't chase, when what's actually true is that he's chasing on a very specific delay, dressed up as discipline. This is worth being precise about, because one instance of pulling back doesn't mean any of this. Waiting an hour to reply on a genuinely busy day isn't a pattern. Being unavailable one weekend because of real plans isn't manufactured distance. The concern isn't the individual moment, it's when delay becomes the default setting regardless of what's actually happening in his life that day. A single late reply is neutral. A late reply that happens every single time, engineered on purpose, is a strategy wearing the costume of a coincidence. Here's a distinction worth sitting with, because it's the one most advice skips completely. Initiative and pursuit are not the same behavior wearing different outfits. Initiative is reaching out because you want to. Pursuit is reaching out because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. You can send the exact same message from either place, and only one of them is sustainable. The guy performing scarcity is doing pursuit with better manners. What this costs him internally is worse than what it costs the relationship. He starts organizing his actual life around her availability instead of the other way around, checking his phone before deciding whether to leave the house, second-guessing plans in case she reaches out, feeling a small flicker of panic in every silence he was supposedly cultivating on purpose. Then it bleeds into places that have nothing to do with her at all. He turns down a hangout with friends because he wants to be free in case she texts, and tells himself he just wasn't in the mood. He puts off something he actually cares about. The gym, a project, a trip he's talked about for years, because some part of him is keeping bandwidth open for a relationship that hasn't fully materialized yet. None of this looks like chasing from the outside. It looks like a normal, slightly quiet week. But the identity he was trying to build, calm, unbothered, hard to rattle, has become a costume he has to keep adjusting, and the shape of his decisions has quietly started orbiting a person who may not even know it's happening. That's the version of pursuit nobody warns you about. It doesn't involve a single text message. At some point, he notices the strategy isn't producing what he wanted, and this is exactly where the tempting overcorrection shows up. If slow replies created interest, maybe total silence creates more. If acting busy worked, maybe disappearing works better. So he goes further. No replies for days, minimal effort, deliberately cold, treating detachment like a weapon instead of a byproduct. This doesn't read as confidence either. It reads as punishment. And most people can tell the difference between someone who's genuinely occupied and someone who's making a point. Silence used as a strategy still has her fingerprints all over the motive, even when no message gets sent. The actual alternative isn't a better version of the game. It's exiting the game entirely, which is a lot less satisfying to hear and a lot more effective to live. Real distance isn't manufactured in the moment you're deciding whether to text back. It's built beforehand, a schedule that's already full, goals that already exist, friendships that don't depend on her, plans that were made regardless of what she does. When your life is genuinely occupied, you don't have to calculate delay. The delay is just what happens while you're living. That's the difference she can actually feel, not a man managing his response to her, but a man whose response to her is one small part of a life that was already moving. Naturally, this creates friction. Because it should. If you've spent months training someone to expect a certain rhythm from you, changing that rhythm, even for healthier reasons, can initially look like disinterest to her, or coldness, or a shift she doesn't understand yet. That discomfort isn't proof you're doing it wrong. It's usually proof the old pattern is actually breaking, which rarely feels smooth on the way out. Expect a stretch where things feel less certain, not more, before they feel better. One day of not checking your phone obsessively isn't a new personality. One weekend of genuinely being busy doesn't undo months of monitoring her replies. This only works as a pattern replacing a pattern, consistent, repeated, unremarkable behavior that isn't performed for an audience, because eventually there's nobody watching it happen except you. And that's the real shift underneath all of it. You cannot make her chase you. You were never actually able to control that, no matter how well-timed the message was. What you can control is whether your attention is earned by a genuine life or manufactured for an audience of one. The guys who ruin this aren't bad at strategy. Most of them are good at it. They're just starving underneath the discipline, and eventually that shows through every carefully timed reply. Zoom out far enough, and this stops being about texting rhythm entirely. It's about whether your sense of being enough depends on someone else's response, or whether it was already settled before she ever showed up. Chasing was never really about replying too fast. It was a symptom of needing the relationship to validate something that should have already been true about you. Fix the source, and the symptom mostly handles itself. You stop calculating replies because you genuinely have less spare attention to give, not because you're rationing it on purpose. So if the title brought you here looking for the right delay, the right message, the right amount of silence, that was never really the lever. The lever is the life you're building, whether or not she's part of it. Build that, actually build it, not perform it, and the need to make her chase you starts to quietly disappear. What's left isn't a tactic anymore. It's just who you already were before you started managing it.